I'm Aaron.
Welcome to Pretty Good Cooking. Tonight on the show, we're gonna teach you how to make beer. And here's a picture of it. All right, John, teach us how to make beer.
All right, so
Also, who are you?
I'm John.
What's your backstory?
I am the managing member or a managing member of Warped Wing Brewing Company and the brewmaster for the company. I've been making beer for 2.5 decades. So hopefully you've enjoyed it today while you've been here.
Hell yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about how you make beer. We'll walk you through the various steps. We're not brewing right now because we're already put away for the day, but we'll give you the best description that we can. So the first thing we're going to do is we bring in our malt. We get it all in bags, 55 pounds. The bags of malt come from various parts of the world: England, Germany, United States, Canada, etc. We fork truck them up here onto this platform that we're standing on, and ultimately we will dump them into this hopper that's right behind Kyle, and then they'll be conveyed up to the mill where they'll be crushed. But when the malt comes in, the whole kernel malt will look something like this. So we have various types of malt. This is a roasted malt, obviously, which is why it's darker in color. And so we use various malt types in order to get the different colors and flavors and so forth in beer.
Okay, so imagine that I'm an idiot, and I'm not.
I don't have to imagine that.
All right, so the illusion is complete. What is malt made out of?
Barley, right? Mostly barley. So the basis for beer is barley malt. But you can also malt wheat, you can malt spelt, you can malt rye, you can malt the various grains. And so when you malt, what you're doing is you're tricking the kernel of barley or whatever grain it is you're using into thinking it's springtime and it's going to start to sprout. And so as it sprouts, it's converting a lot of its complex components into degraded components so that the plant that's inside the kernel that wants to grow can feed off of it and grow.
Yeah.
Right? So what we do is we trick it into thinking that it's springtime, it's time to grow. And then as it starts to grow, we will then put it in the kiln and heat it to take the moisture out so that it will stop growing. And so what we have is this kernel that's been partially degraded that we can now access all the sugars and so forth in, that we can then ultimately turn into alcohol, which is good for us.
So what you're saying is that for that malt, you trick it into thinking that it's going to generate new life.
Yes.
And as soon as it gets started, you cut it down.
Yeah.
And then you beat the crap out of it until it's alcohol.
More or less.
I like this.
Yeah. So anyways, we take the grain, and depending on what we're making, that malted barley and wheat and so forth, run it through there, mill it, and then from the mill, you're not going to be able to see the mill, I'm sorry, because it's up a ship's ladder and someplace it's hard to access. But it'll be conveyed over here into this vessel. This is called a grist hopper, all right?
Grist hopper?
That's right. And so the grist is the ground malt, right? So that's all been put in, it's all been milled. The mill's up there. You might barely be able to see the top of it up there. Then from there, it's conveyed into this. It's sitting here. So when we come in to brew tomorrow, this has already been milled in, and our brewers will be able to come in, preheat the mash lauter tun, and then start to mix the grain, the grist, the malted barley that we've crushed with hot water. And the way that's done is with this plow and raking system.
Is that like a big ass paddle?
That is a big ass paddle, yeah. And so we're dropping this grain in here. We're bringing water in through this knuckle, and it's all dropping in here. We're mixing it up. Once it's all in there, it looks a little bit like oatmeal. And we're looking for a specific temperature and a specific pH, and if we achieve that, then we get enzymatic activity. We have an alpha and beta amylase that degrade complex sugars into simple sugars, right? And so depending on how we manipulate those temperatures and pHs, we get more or less fermentable sugar that we can then feed to the yeast, which will result in more or less alcohol, more or less residual sugar in mouthfeel and body and so forth.
Yeah.
Right?
Why are the components of the paddles squiggly?
Well, honestly, I don't know. But by making them that way, we used to have them straight and they all bent. There's some engineering purpose for why they're designed that way. And when we originally built them, I told the guys that built this stuff, I was like, don't make them straight, make them zigzag like that. And they're like, no, that's going to cost a lot more money. We don't know how to do it. Da 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 da. So we didn't do it.
Bending metal, it can't be done.
So they didn't do it, and of course, all the brakes ended up bad. Yeah. And so we're like, okay. So I went to another group, and I had them remake them the way that I wanted them, the way that literature tells you to make them. And as you can see, although they're zigzag, they're all vertical, and they've maintained their straightness. So for whatever reason, that works.
Cool.
And then as you can see, there's a false bottom, there's a screen on the floor. Right, so that allows us to hold all solid particulate, all the malted barley, the crushed malted barley in this tank. It allows us then to run off all the liquid out of there and over to the boil kettle, right? And so as we start to separate the liquid in solid phases, we'll also spray fresh water, hot water, over the grain bed. So it's almost like a giant coffee filter.
Okay.
So we start to leach all the sugars and all the colors, flavors, proteins, etc.
like
out of that grain.
Kind of like a percolator or something?
A little bit. We're not recycling it per se.
Yeah.
But we're extracting the sugars. We're leaving the solids here. We're taking the liquid. We're putting it there. Right? So that period where it rests in there, we've just got it mixed up and it looks like oatmeal, that's called the mash. Mm-hmm. That separation process where we separate the liquid from the solids, that's called the lauter. Or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a sparge. Right?
Lauter or sparge?
Lauter, L-A-U-T-E-R, or sparge, S-P-A-R-G-E.
I've never heard either of those words.
Well, that's because you're not a brewer. You're
not yet.
Yeah. Well, we're working on it. So, thus, this particular tank is called a mash lauter tun.
Tun?
Tun just means tank.
Okay.
It's an English term, right? But those are the two processes, mash and lauter. So mixing the grain, the crushed grain with hot water, and getting that conversion of starch to sugar, and then separating the liquid phase from the solid phase. Right? Then we're going to come over here to the brew kettle. As you can see, when you look in there, it's steam jacketed. So we're using steam to power the boil. We're looking for a rolling boil. We want, well, out of the malted barley, we get a lot of sulfur compounds. Sulfur has a really high molecular weight, doesn't like to evaporate. So by having a rolling boil, we can bring all the sulfur to the surface of the tank, of the kettle, and then the action of the water evaporating off the kettle will carry the sulfur and strip it out of the liquid. Right? So that's one of the purposes of the boil.
So sulfur being in beer would be bad, right?
Well,
it wouldn't taste that great.
Well, there's some off flavors like dimethyl sulfide, which are sulfur-based. So they taste like cooked corn or cooked cabbage, cooked vegetables. If you're a fan of Rolling Rock beer, if you drink that beer, that finish that particular beer has is dimethyl sulfide. With Rolling Rock, it's intentional, right? So
weird.
Yeah. So we take all that evaporant that comes off and we side stream it and it goes down the drain. If you don't catch it and side stream it, then it drops back into the kettle and it gives you that sort of dimethyl sulfide cooked corn flavor.
I feel like that's the right choice. I mean, I say that out of ignorance.
There's no feeling that it is the right choice.
I don't want that cabbage beer.
There's no accounting for what people like, right? So
there can't be that.
The other thing that happens,
like, give me that cabbage beer.
Yeah, I like cooked corn in my beer. The other thing that happens in the kettle is we add our hops, right? That's really what the boil kettle is known for. So the active ingredient in a hop is called an alpha acid. It's an oil that isomerizes when it's exposed to heat. What that means is its chemical structure is going to change, so that it goes from being a volatile compound that wants to come out of solution to being a stable compound that wants to stay in solution. As we stabilize it, it becomes bitter. So the more heat we expose the alpha acid to, the more bittering property we're going to get out of it, right? So the bittering hops that we add to the beers, we want to add early in the boil process so that it has the most exposure to heat, right? Yeah. Now, if we're looking for flavor or aroma out of the hops, we might add those later in the kettle so they have less exposure to heat, or we might actually add them on the cold side over in the fermentation block, right? So they don't have exposure to heat really at all. And so like if you're drinking an IPA, that's why you're getting that big hop aroma. It's volatile, it wants to come out of the beer. And so they've been added late, or they've been added on the fermentation side.
Oh, interesting.
So we add the hops at different times during the kettle, and of course the hops that we use come from different parts of the globe depending on what sort of flavor profile we're looking for. American hops tend to be really brash, which is a personality type of all Americans.
Hell yeah.
Hops.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. The European hops tend to be a little more reserved and refined.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. In the Southern Hemisphere hops, like the Australian, New Zealand, they're just fruity. I don't know what that means, but maybe that's their personality type too. Cheers to that. All right. Anyway, so from
good on ya.
Yeah. So from the boil, we come over to the whirlpool, and we're going to use centrifugal force here. And again, this is just a big open tank, big open flat bottom tank, right? So we tangentially load all the liquid from the kettle in here, and that centrifugal force will take all the plant material from the hops. We develop these protein and polyphenol complexes called hot break in the kettle, which is the first step of clarifying beer. It forces all that stuff to the outside of the whirlpool. Then you get these secondary forces called torus eddies, right, that then bring everything from the outside to the middle. So think of it like stirring a teacup.
Yeah.
Where do all the tea leaves end up in the cup? In the bottom, in the middle, right? So you have centrifugal forces taking them to the outside, torus eddies then bringing them back to the middle. And they all collapse when you stop stirring them right in the center. That same principle works here. And then we can transfer the liquid off the edge of the tank without any of those solids, from the plant material from the hops, the hot break, that polyphenol protein complex, all gets left here, and we can dispose of it, and the clear liquid then goes into the fermentation cell. Right now, the thing to keep in mind is this liquid's been in the boil kettle, so it's 212 degrees. It'll have a little residence time here, so maybe it's cooled down to like 210.
Okay.
But that's hot.
Yeah, it's very hot.
That's gonna kill your yeast if you put it into the yeast at that temperature. So we gotta cool it down so that we don't kill our yeast, right? So we're gonna run through a heat exchanger, which I'll show you right around the corner here.
All right.
All right, so this is the heat exchanger. It's connected to our cold liquor tank on the one side and the hot liquor tank on the outlet side. And so as we come from the whirlpool, we run in on the far side and out here and out to whatever tank we're going into, and then we counterflow with cold water on the other side of the plates of this heat exchanger so that it exchanges the temperature. So we have a stainless steel plate. On one side you have cold water, on the other side you have the hot wort, the unfermented beer called wort. As they pass across that sheet of metal, the cold water becomes hot and the hot wort becomes cold, right? And then we'll catch that hot water in our hot water tank. We'll use it to make the next batch of beer or to run our cleaning procedures or what have you. And then the cold liquid comes out here, and we're gonna, depending on what we're making, we're gonna cool this liquid down from 210 plus degrees down to about 68 degrees if we're making an ale, or about 50 degrees if we're making a lager. And we can do that whole volume. That volume is about 1,200 gallons. We'll do that whole volume in about an hour. Cool that whole thing down.
So in this context, liquor just means liquid.
It just means water.
Yeah, water.
Hot liquor tank means hot water tank. Cold liquor tank means cold water tank.
So you got the different beer types at different temperatures. What's up with that?
Well, you know, your yeast, which is a living organism, is going to respond differently under different sets of stresses. And the flavor profile that it'll kick off into your beer will be imparted by the stresses that you place it under.
Okay.
Right, so by adjusting the fermentation temperature, we're going to adjust the flavor profile. The yeast kicks off, A, and B, it's also going to dictate how long a time it takes to process the whole fermentation, right? So if you think back to high school chemistry, when you add heat to an equation, it speeds up.
Right.
Right? Conversely, if you remove it, it slows down. So if I'm fermenting colder, it's going to take longer, right? So a lager, which we're going to ferment in the upper 40s, low 50s, is going to take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, maybe longer than that, depending on the beer that we're making. If I'm making an ale and I'm fermenting up around 68 degrees, it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks. Right?
So the ale, those yeast are more stressed out.
Well, they're less stressed out, really. Because, well, think about how you feel. If it's 70, 75 degrees outside, how you feeling?
Really great.
Right.
I spent the weekend in Northwest Michigan, and it was that temperature the whole time.
And you felt great.
Yeah.
How would you have felt if it was like 45 degrees outside?
Miserable.
Right. See, that's my point. So the lack of heat in that case is a stress, right? Right. So if you're out ice fishing, right? You go to Michigan in January, you go ice fishing.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, you should try it. It's pretty nice.
Okay.
You know, a little blackberry brandy while you're on the ice.
The fine brandy.
It's good. So when you're out there in freezing weather, and you're shivering,
you're trying to live.
You might just sit there and do nothing. Watch this little fishing line in the ice hole.
Yeah, that's the point of it, right?
And you get home and you're exhausted because you've been shivering all day. Meanwhile, you could go out to the lake shore in summer and it's 80 degrees.
Yeah.
Go swimming, come home, and you're ready to go out and party all night.
One of those sounds a lot better than the other.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I'm not an ice fisherman. I painted that picture deliberately for you.
Okay.
Right.
It works.
But that's the way it works, right?
Cool.
So stress that you place on these is going to impact its flavor profile.
That's interesting. So what I have learned is that you're not stressing out the yeast by adding heat, you're stressing them by depriving them of it.
Well, conversely, you can stress it by adding heat. Like, so when we make a Saison, we'll ferment that up around 95 degrees.
Those are some...
And that starts to be stress on the yeast, right?
Those are some funky beers.
They're funky, and you really think about that more like a horse race where you're using the switch to get the horse to run faster, right? That's what you're doing to your yeast, right? So you're making it work harder and faster, and therefore it's throwing off that sort of funky quality that you're looking for from the flavor profile.
So I gotta ask you a question, and it's gonna be a difficult question to a certain extent. But your career and your livelihood is based on yeast, right?
Absolutely.
Is yeast vegan?
Is yeast vegan? Yeah, yeast is vegan. It's not a conscious entity as far as I am concerned, but I'm not a vegan.
Yeah.
I don't know what people think, but
what do you think the base?
Yeast is a microflora. It's not bacteria. It's like a fungus, right?
Tiny plant. Tiny fungus.
It's not a plant either.
Tiny mushroom.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, so I don't know. I in fairness, I don't know the answer to that question.
Most vegans say, yeah, it is. Otherwise, they couldn't eat bread.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And then what would they eat?
Dirt? I don't know.
Probably some microbes in that. I don't know.
Probably. Yeah. Fill you up anyway.
That's good enough.
Yeah. So anyways, from here, then we're going to go around the corner into the fermentation cellar. So these are our fermentation tanks. You always, when you go to a brewery, you always know the fermentation tanks because they've got a cone bottom. So while we've been doing all that stuff on the brew house that we just walked through, one of the guys will be back here, get the tank set up. So when we empty the tank, we CIP it, we clean it. So it's already clean. But then we're going to sanitize it right before we use it. So we're using different chemicals in order to make sure there's no microflora in the tank.
What kind of chemicals?
We primarily use iodophor, but you might also use what's called a peroxyacetic acid.
Okay.
You could use hot water.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if your water is hot enough and you want to heat the tank up,
yeah, that'll kill it.
It'll kill it, right? So we get the tank set up. We put the yeast in, so the yeast gets reused from fermentation to fermentation.
Okay.
So let's say,
like a transgenerational yeast.
That's right.
And you're like continually developing, right?
Well, we'll only use it so many times because what you'll see is it's just like your kids, you get genetic drift, right? And so they're not exactly like you; they're sort of like you, right? So the yeast is the same way.
kids yet.
Well, when you have
I got some dogs though, and they're pretty dumb.
Yeah. When you have them, you know what I'm talking about.
Okay, all right.
So we can only use the yeast so many times.
And just like people are only useful for so long.
That's right. And then we put them out to pasture.
Or a tea bag.
Right.
Jesus. That probably won't end up in there if I let it, just so you know.
It could. So let's say we got yeast in this tank. It's fermented. It's done.
Okay.
When it's finished, it will. It's like the pioneers in their Conestoga wagons, right? When it's done eating and it's out of food, and it's like, oh, danger, we got to huddle up.
They got dysentery?
No, they don't have dysentery, but they circle the wagons. And
okay.
They conglomerate together, and as those yeast cells conglomerate together, they gain mass.
Yeah. And
then they sink out of solution, right? We pulled the yeast over from tank A to tank B, and then we bring.
Where did the yeast come in?
The yeast came from this tank. We were fermenting with this. We buy yeast from a yeast bank, and then we grow it up.
A yeast bank?
Yeah, there's several of them around the country. They're not like banks, you know, like JP Morgan or any of that.
That's where I was hoping you would go with it.
No.
Will they give me a credit card if I ask them nicely?
They might give you a credit limit. I don't think they're going to give you a credit card.
How many kinds of yeast does the average yeast bank have?
Hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yeah. So there's several ale strains, there's several lager strains, there's several sort of, weird, undefinable. There's somewhere in between the two or outside of the whole, and then of course they'll also sell various other microflora, lactobacillus, if you want to make a sour beer, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
that lactobacillus is good. It's good stuff for the people, right? That's like in your regular ferments, right?
No,
like
in your regular fermentation, you don't want any lactobacillus. It's going to make your beer sour. Right? So if you want to make sour beer, then that's great.
What about pickles?
Pickles, yes, that's good. Yeah.
Like a salt brine.
Yogurt.
Yeah, that's lactobacillus, right?
Yeah, that's lactobacillus. Yeah.
Trying to connect the yeast dots.
Yeah. So sour beer can be derived from lacto, can be derived from Brettanomyces, which is a yeast type. It can be derived from a blend of various, Brett, lacto, PDO, etc. So it just depends on and that gets really off on a weird tangent, and we could spend months talking about that. After the fermenter, we run a centrifuge, which is over here. We don't filter, but we run a separator, which is a centrifuge. It's continuous. And so what we're doing is we're essentially multiplying gravity as it runs through this thing.
Yeah.
And so all the haze-causing compounds in the beer get spun out, and then clear beer comes out the other side, and will then go into what we call a bright beer tank, or a finishing beer tank, where we carbonate it and get it ready to go to package.
So again, perhaps dumb question. Is clear beer desirable for aesthetics only, or is there other contributing factors?
Well, there's multiple things in that question. Obviously, there's a sort of trend towards hazy beers, hazy pale ales,
very trendy.
IPAs,
Yeah.
right?
Unfiltered.
Yeah, and that look doesn't necessarily contribute to the flavor. It can contribute to your perception of how it feels in your mouth.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, that makes sense. Good old sandy beer.
Yeah, but otherwise, haze typically leads to shelf instability. So it's not going to want to stay on the shelf as long as well, and so on and so forth. So clear beer, has some, historically speaking, has some preference from just the way it looks and from the way it stores, right? Because a lot of that stuff that creates the haze helps ruin the beer over time.
Makes sense.
Right? Now, this whole hazy IPA thing is really interesting. We don't make one as a regular part of our lineup, but we've been experimenting with them. Unfortunately, it's not on tap yet. We just packaged one the other day. As I did the research on how to make that particular beer, it's like you got to break almost every rule in the book.
Yeah.
To make it, and I had to call on a lot of my friends in the industry that have been making it to be like, hey, educate me, because this is different.
Yeah,
It's a totally different ball game. But in the end, you know, that could be a nice beer. And it's really, it's just like with food, it's a bottom line game, right? Does the consumer appreciate the flavor profile of what you're putting out? So if that's
This guy runs a business.
Right? If that's what they want, that's what you give them, right?
Yeah.
So it isn't always what I want, right? I'd actually like to make that beer without haze, but it makes it harder to sell the beer. People don't want it that way.
That's interesting.
People want it hazy. So we've had to do a lot of work to like ensure that we get a nice haze out of that beer.
That damn consumer.
I know.
They don't know what's good.
Well, sometimes they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're smarter than we are. Sometimes they're not. Most of the time they are. So anyways, that's how we clarify beer. If we're not going to clarify it, then we'll just bypass this thing. And then we go into these, what we call bright beer tanks. And so then we'll carbonate in those tanks. Those tanks are pressure rated. And then from there, we will go to the various packaging lines that we run. We have a can line, we have a bottle line, we have a keg line. Right? Now, there is one intermediate step that we might take depending on what we're making, and that is we might age the beer in a barrel.
Yeah, I've seen some barrels around here.
We got a lot of barrels. You had that Baltic Argonaut earlier.
Holy moly!
Yeah, in a rye whiskey barrel. So if we're going to do that, then before we come to the separator and before we go to the bright tank, then we'll go to the barrel. And we'll age in the barrel for varying amounts of time, depending on what the base beer is, how strong it is, what the barrel type is, what we're trying to achieve, etc. And then after the barrel, we'll rack back into a tank, and then we'll go through the separator and the bright tank, and so on. So if you want, we can walk over and we can take a look at some barrels.
Yeah, let's look at some barrels.
We have a number of barrels. We got a whole pile of barrels right here. We got a whole pile of barrels behind you over there. So right now we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 250 or so barrels of varying types. Bourbon whiskey, rye whiskey, Tennessee whiskey, port wine, Chardonnay, tequila, mezcal, all the barrels. All the good stuff, right? Depending on what we're trying to make and what we're trying to achieve from a flavor profile, we'll pick different substrates. In fact, I got some barrels that were bourbon whiskey that were used to age maple syrup in.
Okay.
And then we put beer in it. Right. So like you can see here, we have the barrels numbered. So that's barrel 782, batch 564A. It was filled in February 19th of this year. First juice, it's a rum barrel, and then this is the brand that went into the barrel. And so, you know, we track this. We've also got it on a spreadsheet, of course, on a computer. It's 2019.
Right.
But you also got to be able to come out and identify the thing. And then we drop these stainless steel nails in them so we can sample the barrels.
I was going to ask about that.
So we can taste them. You want to taste the barrel?
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
All right, we'll do that in a second. And then we also can pull a sample, because we'll do a bunch of QC work on the wood before we rack it all into the tank. Because, you know, I might have 20, 30, 50 of these, right? I might have 2, right? But I want to do a QC test on each one, make sure I don't have any undesirable
variability
right in there, because I might have one good one, I might have one bad one. If I put them together, then they're both bad, right? So you have all these touch points, and you got to test them all, and it's a huge process and a huge expense. But let me get a glass and let me get my stuff, and we'll pull some nails.
What you spraying that with?
This is just a sanitizer, which really does nothing to that, but makes me feel good about doing it.
I'm comforted that you did it.
Yeah.
Oh my Christ.
Now you got to keep in mind that this has not been carbonated, right? It's completely still.
That doesn't bother me. So what is it?
This is a Belgian double pumpkin beer.
Wow.
Asian called Climb Head. And it's aged in a rum barrel.
That's really good. And it would be better when it was carbonated, but like that's really, really good. You guys want to try it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that pumpkin.
This was one of my favorites last year.
That's so nice.
Yeah, oh my god, I almost don't even need a carbonated. It tastes like a...
Bake me in a pie.
That was one of my favorite ones last year.
The smell of that is incredible.
Yeah.
It's like pumpkins and rum, but it works so well together.
So this beer's got pumpkin in it, it's got a little bit of nutmeg, some cinnamon, some molasses, the rum barrel. Doesn't suck. So anyway, so barrel aging, that gives you an idea of, you know, what that can do.
Hell yeah.
And then, you know, after we age beer in the wood, we'll rack it back to the stainless because it's obviously at an ambient temperature here. The barrels are not temperature controlled. So we got to get it cold again, back in the tank, and then we run it through the separator and then to the bright beer tanks and carbonate it, and then over to package. Right? And so, like I said earlier, we have 3 packaging formats. We have cans. This is our can line. And so, you know, the empty cans will come in here, right? This is
Are these empties?
this is an empty skid of cans,
Cool.
right? I mean, there's nothing to these. And then they will be offloaded into the depallet and then the accumulation tables and then down to a single file. You know, they'll go through the twist rinser and then into the filler. The filler is 12 heads. We're going to pressurize the can. Once the can is at the same, this chamber up here, this space right here is called the bowl. This is where
the bowl?
the bowl, right? Not the carburetor, the bowl.
The bowl.
The bowl, right? And this is where the beer, as it's coming from the tank, will reside. So this thing is spinning around, and as we're filling, the cans are coming in, the cans will get pressurized to the same pressure level as the bowl, and then the valve will open and the beer will drop in to the can. Because it's all being done under pressure,
Yeah.
then the beer won't foam, right?
Makes sense.
Once we come over here and the can is discharged, then we have a pressure drop when it's discharged from the filling valve, and then it'll start to foam. We want to control the rate of that foaming so we push out any oxygen in the headspace of the can.
How many cans per minute does this baby shoot out?
This machine will do about 100.
100 cans per minute?
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It sounds fast until you start to think about like the big multinational brewers who are running at a couple thousand.
I don't want to
cans a minute.
think about them.
I don't want to think about them either. They make me feel inadequate sometimes. But you know, 100 cans a minute, that's not a bad speed. That's a nice speed.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And then we go over to the seamer, you know, where we put the lid on. It's hermetically sealed to the can. And then we exit, we go through the date coder and so forth. As we come around, we have a fill height inspector here, which is basically an X-ray machine. It makes sure that the beer can has been filled to the minimum specification, right? So that you don't get a short fill, right? That's the idea. So if we're out of spec, then it'll reject off the can line, which is why there's that cutout in the rail.
Yeah.
We'll have a bucket of water there to catch it.
For them to land in. Yeah.
Yep. And then we will manually pull the cans that come off and we will weigh them to validate that the X-ray machine is working correctly.
Okay.
And over the last, 4.5 years, it's never failed. We've never had a can rejected that shouldn't have been rejected. And then we come to this machine, and this is where we put the 6-pack brake pump. So this takes the individual cans in, and it spits the 6-packs out.
You use those recyclable ones? Or the reusable ones?
Yeah, they're recyclable and reusable.
You ever seen those weird anti-6-pack ads from the 90s or whatever, where there's like a fish has got his head caught in there,
the dolphins in there, yeah.
You killed a sea turtle because
We like sea turtles.
they can be majestic.
All right, so this is our bottle line. The bottle line is a little bit more manual. As you can see, there's no depalletizer. We have to manually load the glass on to this in-feed table. It comes in, and then instead of having a gravity-driven twist rinser like we have over there, we have a rotary, mechanically driven rinser, right? And then we have a 12-head filler here, or 9-head. That's 12 over there. This is 9, but it only has a single head crowner, right? Where that has 4-head seamer over there. So that machine will run 100 cans a minute. It just only has one crowning apparatus. It'll only run about 25 a minute, right?
Yeah.
So it's slower, but we're using this bottle line for our high-end barrel-aged beers and so forth. So we do those in much smaller quantities and much more infrequently. whereas our core beers are all going through that machine over there. And then over here, we have our keg line. As a point of reference, the can line is a matrix of US and Chinese parts.
Yeah.
The bottle line is Italian, and the keg line is German. So,
Interesting.
yeah, we're equal opportunists, I suppose. The kegs come in, as you can see here, upside down. And so when we have this operating, this table will be pneumatically lifted so it's at the same level as the in-feed conveyor. And then that first head, we're gonna turn it on, and we're gonna use compressed air to push any contents out of the keg. And then we're gonna wash the keg with what's called a caustic, which is sodium hydroxide with some other surfactants and stuff in it. And we're gonna rinse it, and we're gonna wash it with an acid. So your caustic takes your proteins off, your acids takes your mineral deposits off. Then we'll rinse it again, and then boom, the thing will cycle up, the clamps will come off the kegs, we'll move the first keg over to the second head, and then bring another keg in, start, boom. So that first head will run. Simultaneously, the second head will then sanitize the keg with steam, then purge it with CO2, then pressurize it with CO2, and then it will fill under counter pressure, and so we'll regulate the rate of fill as we release the pressure in the keg. That'll control how fast it fills and therefore how much it foams, right? And we got a magnetic flow meter that tells us how much beer we've put into the keg, so we know that we've always got the right amount of beer in it. So once we get this thing running, both heads are running simultaneously, and we're running about 20-22 units an hour. So the 6 barrels, which are the small kegs, and the half barrels, which are the bigger kegs, all sort of run at the same rate.
What's a unit?
Keg, right? Either a 6 barrel or a half barrel, right?
So either one.
Yeah, they run it. It takes it more or less the same amount of time to run either package type, which is why 6 barrels always cost more per unit of volume than half barrels. And it takes me the same amount of time to fill them as it takes for a half barrel, but a half barrel has 3 times as much volume in it. Therefore, my labor cost per unit of volume is less, right? So I can offer a discount on the half barrels. If you want a half barrel, I can sell it to you on a cheaper per ounce or per gallon cost than I can sell you a 6 barrel, right?
And it's on that 22 units per minute metric.
Yep. So if
Sounds like a good value.
Well, yeah, if you can turn it, if you have enough demand in your bar to turn the bigger, half barrel versus the 6 barrel, right? And then they kick off, and then we'll manually stack them onto a skid here, and then we pull them off down into the cold box.
Cool.
Yeah, this is a nice machine.
Of the 3 packaging lines, which one's your favorite?
This one,
Why is that?
because it doesn't break down.
There's nothing better when something works.
Yeah, that's right. So as you can see here, we have a bunch more barrels over here. This is our loading dock down this way. We do stuff like this. See this here? This is the stack pattern for the cases that kick off of this line. We have one over there for them. Because you gotta let people know how you do it. Real press. Our truck's already been in, so there isn't gonna be a lot of package beer in here, but like these little tanks we use to store yeast in, and then this is all our hop storage that we keep on site here. Backup inventory for the bar.
I used to work in a research greenhouse that had a cold room that smelled just like this.
How's it feel in here, Phil?
Frosty, it's really nice.
Yeah, so this is our operation. Not the biggest operation on the planet, but
How much beer you make?
we'll do about 8,000 barrels of beer this year, somewhere in that neighborhood. Average amount of beer produced by a brewery in the US is about 750 barrels.
So you got a decent
We
operation.
do okay, but we're nowhere near the top 100 or anything like that. There's a lot of guys out there that are just doing 2, 3, 4 barrels of beer. Yeah, we'll be opening up this new location down south of here in a town called Springboro, which will be our pilot system. And you'll have to come back because Aaron's gonna have a smoker down there.
He told me about it.
Yeah, we're buying like the Ferrari of smokers.
Oh yeah.
Nobody in this company gets to drive a Ferrari except for Aaron. It's gonna be a
Look at this.
smoking-
Look at this happy man.
It's gonna be a smoking Ferrari, right?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to it as well. So that should be open next summer. Our target date's about June 1st.
Okay, couple questions for you.
Yeah.
It's a hot day, real hot, like scorcher. What's your go-to beer on a scorcher day?
Oh, Trotwood. Yeah, no doubt. Trotwood.
Very good. Complete 180. you're freezing your balls off, you don't want to go anywhere, what do you go for?
Well, that's when I'm going into like barrel aged beers.
Yeah.
So like the one you had earlier, like the Baltic Argonaut that we had in the rye whiskey barrel.
That tasted like the dead of winter.
Yeah. All right, we need more beers.
Yeah, thanks for showing us around.
Hey, Phil, my pleasure.
And that concludes the beer tour. That's how you do it.